Around 30 years ago, under the heavy veil of a cold, ink-black night, my father, a seasoned truck driver, found himself navigating a desolate stretch of highway. The long-haul life had molded him into a man of few words, but deep instincts. Years spent behind the wheel had honed his senses to the road's unpredictable nature. It was well past midnight, edging towards that eerie pocket of time between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the world seems to hold its breath and the air thickens with an unnatural stillness. The hum of the diesel engine was the only companion in the vast emptiness as he carved his way through the dark, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the creeping fog. Miles from any town, the road felt like a forgotten artery, an ancient vein of cracked asphalt snaking through a wilderness that seemed untouched by time. It twisted and turned through endless forests, dense with towering pine trees that loomed on either side like silent sentinels, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky, stark against the faint shimmer of the moonlight breaking through the choking mist. The trees grew so thick they seemed to lean inward, as though conspiring to swallow the road whole, their roots pushing up against the brittle edges of the asphalt, cracking it in jagged lines that snaked across the surface like old scars. There was a heavy, suffocating stillness in the air, broken only by the distant cry of some unseen bird or the occasional rustle of underbrush as nocturnal creatures stirred. The headlights of the truck barely pierced the darkness ahead, swallowed quickly by the oppressive fog that rolled in waves across the ground, swirling like restless spirits. The deeper into the forest he drove, the more the road felt detached from reality, as though he were driving through a place untouched by the flow of ordinary time. It was the kind of road where cell signals died without warning, where the radio sputtered into static, and the silence between songs stretched on too long, heavy and unsettling. It was a place where old stories took root, whispers of fatal accidents, of drivers who vanished without a trace, of headlights spotted on empty roads long after the wreckage had been cleared. Tales passed from one long-haul trucker to another during late-night pit stops, often dismissed as ghost stories, cautionary tales spun to break the monotony of endless miles. But there was a strange weight to them, a lingering sense of something unspoken that settled over the road like dust. Yet my father wasn't the type to indulge in superstition. He was a man of the road, grounded in reality, a firm believer in what he could see, hear, and touch. Years of driving through storms, deserts, and mountains had hardened him against fear. Mechanical failures, reckless drivers, icy roads, those were the dangers he knew. But the deeper he ventured into the suffocating isolation of that forest road, the more he felt an inexplicable tension rising within him, a cold unease that seemed to seep into the cab, heavier with every passing mile. It was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of his neck, an instinctual alarm that something was off. The kind of feeling that came not from the mind, but from something older, something buried deep in the bones. The hum of the tires on the rough road, the faint whine of the engine, the rhythmic swing of the windshield wipers, all of it seemed too loud, too sharp against the crushing silence beyond the glass. It was as though the forest was watching, waiting, holding its breath for something inevitable. Still, he dismissed it. Just another lonely stretch of highway, he told himself. Just the weight of exhaustion settling in. But then came the fog, thicker, colder, and heavier than before, curling in slow, deliberate movements across the asphalt, blurring the lines between earth and sky. And that's when he saw her. And from that moment on, the road was never just a road again. It was something else, something alive. Something waiting. The fog grew heavier, thickening into swirling, ghostly plumes that danced and twisted in the beams of the headlights, as though the earth itself was exhaling something ancient, decayed, and forgotten. It crept low across the cracked asphalt, heavy and deliberate, curling in tendrils that clawed at the undercarriage of the truck, wrapping around the tires like pale fingers. The air inside the cab grew colder, a damp chill seeping through the vents, heavy with the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something metallic, sharp and biting, like rusted iron or old blood. The mingling of damp moss and cold metal filled his lungs, carrying with it a strange heaviness that settled deep in his chest. His breath fogged the inside of the windshield, thin wisps of condensation curling upward before disappearing into the stale air. The wipers squealed as they dragged across the glass, barely keeping the mist at bay, each swipe revealing only more of the thick, impenetrable white ahead. The radio crackled with static as he twisted the dial, trying to catch a thread of music, a voice, anything to break the oppressive silence. But all he found was the low hum of white noise, broken only by sudden bursts of garbled transmissions, fragmented words lost in the ether. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he leaned forward, squinting through the fog. The darkness beyond the headlights was suffocating, thick like tar, and the road ahead seemed to stretch into nothingness. The fog wasn't just a natural mist, it had weight, a kind of presence, moving with a slow, deliberate intention that felt almost sentient. Then, out of the swirling haze, something materialized. At first, it was nothing more than a dark smudge against the wall of white, but as the truck lumbered closer, the shape sharpened, cutting through the fog with unsettling clarity. A figure stood on the side of the road. She appeared out of the mist like a painting soaked in water, features blurred, edges soft, her figure barely solid against the heavy shroud of fog that twisted and curled around her. For a moment, it was hard to tell if she was even real, or just a trick of the light and the heavy, choking mist. But as the headlights rolled over her, illuminating every hollowed crease of her face, there was no doubt she was there, fragile and human, though there was something deeply unsettling in the way she moved, or rather, the way she barely moved at all. An old woman, frail and alone, trudging along the narrow shoulder of the desolate road, her thin frame hunched beneath the weight of a long, tattered coat. The fabric clung to her like wet laundry on a sagging clothesline, heavy and limp, darkened by moisture, its edges frayed and trailing like skeletal fingers dragging along the pavement. Her gray hair hung in wild, matted knots, strands tangled and wiry, the kind that hadn't felt a comb in years, if ever. It spread around her head in a tangled halo, catching the moisture from the fog, giving it a damp, heavy sheen. Her head hung low as she walked, shoulders slumped forward as if each step was an unbearable burden, yet there was something in the way her feet barely lifted from the ground that made her movement appear less like walking and more like drifting. In the dead of night, miles from civilization, with the road stretching endlessly in both directions and the suffocating forest pressing in close, it was an image that clawed at the edges of rational thought. His mind scrambled for explanations, forcing reason into the unreasonable. Maybe she was lost. Maybe her car had broken down. Maybe, somehow, she had wandered from a house hidden deep in the woods. But even as he grasped for answers, the facts refused to align. There was no car. No flickering hazard lights in the distance. No suitcase or shopping bag hanging from her hand. No flashlight. Nothing that made sense. And it was cold, bitterly cold, the kind of night that sliced through layers of fabric and gnawed at the bones. Her coat, though long, looked thin, threadbare at the edges. Her feet, from what he could see, shuffled in shoes so worn that the rubber soles curled at the edges, the fabric torn and darkened with wet stains. Her presence out here, alone, in the dead of night, was not just strange, it was impossible. The longer he stared, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't just the circumstances. It was her. The way the fog seemed to cling to her, not around her, as if it bled from her skin in long, trailing ribbons. The way her thin shoulders barely rose and fell with breath. The way her shadow, cast weakly in the headlights' glow, stretched too far, warped across the ground like something not quite tethered to her form. A cold knot twisted in his gut. Out here, on this forgotten road, there was no reason for her to be. And yet, there she was, trudging forward with slow, methodical steps, like she was following a path only she could see. Her posture didn't speak of panic or desperation, as one might expect from someone lost or in trouble. Instead, there was a grim, heavy patience in the way she moved, a steady, purposeful rhythm that suggested she wasn't lost at all. She was waiting. Waiting for something. Or someone. The thought flickered in his mind, cold and uninvited, sending a ripple of unease through his body. He tried to shake it off, tried to convince himself that this was just another oddity of the road. He'd seen strange things before. People acted strange when they were desperate or delirious. But this wasn't that. This was different. A heavy stillness had settled over the world, a thick, suffocating silence that pressed against the cab of the truck, muting even the steady rumble of the engine. The air itself felt heavy, dense, as if filled with invisible fog, not just outside the truck but inside it too, pressing against his skin, filling his lungs with each shallow breath. His headlights bathed her fully now, every shadowed wrinkle and deep groove on her face standing out in stark detail. Her skin sagged in paper-thin folds over her sharp cheekbones, her mouth a thin, colorless line. Her eyes, deep-set and hollow, didn't seem to reflect the light the way they should have. Instead, they absorbed it, turning into twin pools of darkness, deep and cold. His heart pounded harder in his chest, a slow, heavy thud that seemed too loud in the stillness. Logic warred with instinct. Every road-worn part of him knew this wasn't right. Knew he shouldn't stop. Knew that whoever she was, didn't belong out here. But his hand was already reaching for the brake. My father was a kind man, the kind who still carried the belief that people should look out for one another, especially on roads like these lonely, forgotten stretches where help didn't come easy and the darkness seemed to swallow everything whole. It was a belief that had been instilled in him long before the years hardened his hands and carved deep lines into his face. A belief passed down from old-timers who'd spent their lives behind the wheel, where the unspoken code of the road still mattered. If someone was in trouble, you stopped. You helped. No questions. Even now, as a cold, instinctual dread curled in the pit of his stomach, that simple rule pulled at him stronger than fear. His foot eased off the gas, and the massive truck began to slow, its heavy tires chewing at the asphalt before the brakes engaged with a long, hissing exhale that broke the thick, unnatural silence. The red glow of the taillight stretched into the fog behind him, faint and fragile against the darkness. The truck shuddered as it came to a stop on the rough gravel shoulder, the frame groaning in the cold night air. The thick metal of the cab creaked as it settled, a low, hollow sound that echoed into the stillness. For a moment, he sat there, hands still locked around the steering wheel, the hum of the idling engine the only sound. The fog crawled up the sides of the truck, coiling around the mirrors, obscuring the road ahead and behind until it felt like the world had shrunk to just the cab, the woman, and the suffocating mist between them. He hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as he shifted slightly to the right, aligning the passenger side window with the figure still trudging slowly along the shoulder. She hadn't acknowledged him yet. She hadn't changed her pace or even lifted her head. It was as if she didn't hear the thunderous roar of the diesel engine, as though the truck's blinding headlights and the red glow of its taillights meant nothing to her at all. Still, he leaned over, his elbow creaking against the worn leather seat as he reached for the handle, the cold metal biting into his fingers. The old crank squealed as he turned it, lowering the passenger side window inch by inch. A rush of cold night air poured into the cab, thick with the damp, mossy scent of the forest and that same metallic tang he couldn't quite place, like rusted iron or the coppery sting of blood. The fog slipped inside with it, curling in thin tendrils along the dashboard, ghosting over the cracked leather seats and the scattered wrappers and maps that cluttered the console. It felt alive, like it was reaching for something. The night was quieter now, the growl of the engine muffled by the heavy mist. Through the open window, the forest beyond seemed impossibly vast, a black abyss broken only by the soft, whispering rustle of leaves in the wind and the faint, distant chirping of night insects. But beneath that, there was something else, a hollow, almost imperceptible hum that didn't seem to come from the engine or the trees. It vibrated low and steady, like a pressure against his chest. "Ma'am?" His voice felt small, strangled by the heavy fog as it floated out into the cold air. The woman didn't respond. Her pace didn't change. She was close enough now that he could see the slow, dragging shuffle of her feet, the way her worn shoes barely lifted from the gravel, making a soft, sandpapery scraping sound that seemed to echo louder than it should have. His grip tightened on the window crank. Something deep inside, something primal, clawed at him, begging him to hit the gas and leave her there. But that same part of him, the one that had pulled over for stranded drivers and hitchhikers for decades, overrode the fear. "Ma'am, do you need help? You shouldn't be out here alone." For a long, suffocating moment, there was nothing but the distant whisper of wind through pine branches and the faint clicking of the idling engine. Then she stopped. Her body froze mid-step, one foot slightly lifted as though she'd forgotten how to walk. The fog thickened around her, swallowing the lower half of her body until it seemed like she was hovering, disconnected from the earth beneath her feet. Her head, slow and deliberate, began to turn. The motion was wrong, too fluid, too heavy, as if her neck wasn't bending naturally, but rather forcing itself through some invisible resistance. Her tangled gray hair shifted as she moved, strands lifting and falling in the damp air, and when her face finally turned toward the open window, the breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were wide, impossibly dark, the irises swallowed by a void that seemed to stretch deeper than the sockets themselves. Her skin was waxy, pale as bone, with deep lines carved into it like dry riverbeds, but her expression wasn't one of fear or gratitude. It was blank. Hollow. She tilted her head, just slightly, as if studying him, and then her lips moved. The words, when they came, were soft, but they cut through the fog in the growling engine as though they were whispered directly into his ear. "Why did you stop? It's not your turn yet." The words felt cold, heavy, not just spoken but delivered, like a message passed through generations of silence. They didn't carry anger or warning, just a simple, hollow certainty. Before he could respond, before he could even think, she turned away, the motion just as slow, just as wrong, and continued walking into the fog, her frail frame melting back into the mist as though she had never been there at all. The cab of the truck felt unbearably small now, the air thick with cold, damp breath that wasn't his. Every instinct screamed at him to go, to drive, to leave this place behind. And so he did. He hit the gas, hard, the tires kicking up gravel as the truck lurched forward into the dark. But as he watched the fog consume his taillights in the rearview mirror, her words echoed again in his mind, heavy and permanent. "It's not your turn yet." He kept his eyes on the road, refusing to check the mirrors, every instinct screaming at him that some things weren't meant to be seen twice. The thought of catching a glimpse of her reflection, of her hollow, black eyes still watching him from the receding fog, gnawed at the edges of his mind. His chest tightened with a pressure that felt almost physical, like invisible hands were pushing down, forcing his heart to beat harder, faster, until each thud echoed in his ears like the relentless pounding of a drum. The air inside the cab grew heavier, thicker, as though the truck had driven into a different pocket of reality, one where the rules bent, warped, and threatened to snap entirely. It wasn't just the dampness from the creeping fog that seeped in through the vents and the thin cracks in the window seals. It was something else, an unseen weight that coiled around his lungs, tightening with every shallow breath. It smelled faintly of cold iron and wet stone, but beneath that was another scent, something sour and old, like forgotten places and untouched graves. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles paled, the leather digging into the creases of his skin. He flexed his fingers once, trying to ease the pressure, but his muscles locked up, rigid with a tension that refused to leave. The wheel itself felt colder now, slick with the condensation of the damp air, but it was more than that. It felt as if something unseen was coiling through the cab, brushing against his shoulders, settling into the seams of the seats, waiting. The road stretched ahead, empty and hollow, the dense fog thinning only enough for the headlights to scrape against the cracked asphalt in a narrow, silver beam. The white dashed lines blurred into streaks, fading in and out of the mist, leading him forward yet giving him no sense of progress. Time stretched thin, the minutes bleeding into each other, until he could no longer tell if he had been driving for 5 minutes or 50. The deeper he drove into the night, the more the forest seemed to press in. Branches drooped lower, their skeletal fingers scraping the edges of the road, some hanging so close they looked ready to reach through the windshield and claw him back into the fog. Shapes twisted in the shadows beyond the tree line, vague, hulking forms that shifted just out of the reach of the headlights. They could have been fallen logs or thick underbrush, but in the corners of his vision, they seemed to pulse with slow, heavy breaths, as if the earth itself was watching, waiting. He swallowed hard, throat dry despite the damp air, his pulse still hammering against his temple. The thought crept in, unbidden and unwelcome. What if she was still following? Not walking anymore, but something else, something faster, something that didn't need legs or roads or rules. He gritted his teeth and forced the thought away. The mirror stayed untouched. The road began to curve, the fog curling tighter with it, and he eased into the bend, the tires humming against the asphalt. That's when the headlights hit something ahead, red and blue lights, swirling through the mist like lighthouses in a sea of white. They cut through the darkness in jagged flashes, painting the trees in violent, bleeding colors. Barely 5 minutes down the road, the first flashing lights pierced through the mist, sharp, frantic bursts of red and blue strobes slicing the darkness like the pulse of some mechanical heart, their glow distorted and fragmented by the thick fog. The colors bled into the mist, casting wild, sweeping shadows across the towering pines, making them loom taller, stranger, their branches twisting like grasping claws. An accident! The word dropped heavy into my father's chest, a cold, hard stone that sank deep, and before he could stop himself, his foot eased off the gas, the truck's speed bleeding away as he approached the scene. His heart hammered a sharp, urgent rhythm against his ribs, a deep, primal beat that clashed with the slow, measured pulse of the flashing lights ahead. The road curved gently, and the scene unfolded fully before him, half-shrouded in fog, eerily quiet, like a tableau frozen in time. A mangled sedan lay crumpled against a thick pine, its front end twisted into an unrecognizable mess of metal and glass, the impact so severe that the hood had folded back over the windshield like tin foil. Shattered fragments glittered across the wet asphalt, scattered like the remnants of something shattered beyond repair. The force of the collision had driven the car deep into the tree, the bark splintered and raw where metal had met wood with brutal finality. Steam hissed from the crumpled engine block, curling into the fog in long, snaking tendrils, as if the car itself was still exhaling its last dying breath. An ambulance sat idling on the shoulder, its headlights off but its emergency lights still flashing in slow, mournful rhythm. The paramedics moved with grim precision, their silhouettes stark against the swirling fog. No one was rushing. There were no frantic hands pulling stretchers or the hurried chatter of life-saving commands. Instead, there was a stillness to their movements, the slow, deliberate actions that only followed after all hope was gone. No urgency, just the cold, procedural steps they took when there was no one left to save. My father's throat tightened as he coasted past the scene, his truck's headlights sweeping over the wreckage. For a split second, through the fractured windshield, he caught sight of the driver's seat. The airbag had deployed, now deflated and stained dark, the fabric torn at the edges. And there, just a glimpse, was the pale shape of a hand, limp and lifeless, fingers curled inwards as though still holding on to something that had long since slipped away. The driver had died on impact. The words echoed hollow in his mind, heavy and sharp, but they didn't need to be spoken. He could feel it in the stillness, in the mechanical detachment of the paramedics, in the empty road stretching behind him like a path back to something he didn't dare face. My father drove on, the weight of what he'd just seen pressing into his chest like a vice, a pressure so heavy it felt like it was trying to crush the very breath from his lungs. His hands, still wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, ached from the force of his grip, knuckles bleached bone white. The truck rumbled beneath him, the steady hum of the diesel engine a hollow, distant sound compared to the roaring in his ears. His heart hadn't slowed, not since he passed that wreckage, not since he saw the broken frame of the car, crumpled like a dead thing against the trees, and felt the cold certainty of death lingering in the air. The old woman's words echoed in his head, relentless, cutting through the hum of the road and the hiss of the tires on damp asphalt. "It's not your turn yet." He barely slept that morning when he finally made it home. The house, usually a place of quiet relief after a long haul, felt hollow, its walls too thin to block out the echoes of the night before. Every creak of the settling house made his heart lurch, every whisper of wind outside stirred the weight in his chest, thick and heavy, refusing to let go. He lay awake on the old couch in the living room, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of dawn creeping in through half-drawn curtains, but the light brought no comfort, only a colder, sharper clarity. His mind tangled and twisted around the memory, replaying every detail on an endless, brutal loop. The fog! The woman! Her voice! The wreck! "It's not your turn yet." The words burrowed deep, clawing at the back of his mind with merciless persistence. He couldn't shake them, couldn't scrub away the image of her hollow eyes reflecting the truck's headlights, or the sight of the mangled sedan crumpled against that tree, its metal bones shattered and twisted. When the heavy thud of the morning paper hit the front step, it jolted him upright as if someone had pounded on the door. His chest still felt tight, a phantom pressure he couldn't explain, but he forced himself up, feet heavy against the worn wooden floor as he moved toward the door. The metal handle felt cold against his palm when he yanked it open. The paper lay there, dewed with morning moisture, the ink on the headline already beginning to run slightly at the edges. He snatched it up, his pulse heavy in his ears as he flipped it open, barely caring that his hands were trembling. There it was, front page. The black and white photo showed the wreck in grim, merciless detail. The twisted metal of the sedan was even worse in daylight, its frame a brutal tangle of crumpled steel and shattered glass, a dark smear of oil bleeding into the dirt where it had come to its violent stop. The article headline was stark and cold. "Fatal crash claims life of local driver, no survivors." He scanned the first few lines with growing dread, every word sinking deeper into his gut. At approximately 2:47 a.m., emergency services responded to a single-vehicle collision along County Road 17. The vehicle, traveling at high speed, left the road on a curve, striking a large pine tree. Authorities confirmed the driver died on impact. 2:47 a.m. His throat tightened. That was exactly the time. He'd seen the old woman minutes before, her frail figure half lost in the fog, her voice heavy with a meaning he hadn't understood in the moment but felt now like a weight on his chest. "Why did you stop?" "It's not your turn yet." His fingers tightened around the edges of the newspaper, crumpling the damp pages. He could feel the thin boundary between what he knew and what he could prove stretching thin, as though reality itself had been twisted, bent just enough that something else, something old, something patient, had slipped through. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. The timestamp was too perfect. Her words too precise. It was as if she had known where death was that night, moving silently through the mist. As if she had been a part of it. He flipped through the rest of the paper, but no other details were offered, just the driver's name, a brief note about his family, and a final line that sent another cold shiver down his spine. No witnesses reported seeing the vehicle before the crash. The road was empty at the time of the accident. Empty! Years passed, but that night clawed at him, its memory a constant, gnawing presence that lingered in the back of his mind no matter how many miles he put between himself and that stretch of road. It wasn't just another strange story tucked away with the countless roadside oddities he'd seen over decades of driving. It was different. It had a weight, a cold, heavy permanence that made it feel less like a memory and more like a scar etched into his very being. Every time he found himself alone on a dark highway, when the only sounds were the low hum of his rig and the whispering winds outside, he could feel it creeping back, curling in the corners of his thoughts like smoke. He'd driven countless miles since then, miles that blurred together into an endless stream of asphalt and empty horizons. He'd pushed through violent storms that battered his windshield with sheets of rain so heavy they felt like stone, the thunder rolling across the skies in deep, angry growls. He'd crossed endless, sun-scorched deserts where the heat shimmered on the road like molten glass, the horizon warping and dancing in the distance, giving shape to things that weren't there or things he prayed weren't there. He'd driven through snowstorms that swallowed the road whole, turning everything into a white void, and through lonely nights so black it felt like he was navigating the edge of some vast, starless abyss, the headlights slicing through the darkness but never quite reaching the end of it. But that encounter had never left him. The more he thought about it, the more it twisted into something darker. What if the woman wasn't warning him? What if she wasn't a ghost of the past, but something else, something that moved through time differently, marking those who were next? It was never about saving someone. It was about passing by for now. The idea haunted him, growing roots in his mind. Every late-night haul, every lonely stretch of highway, he found himself scanning the shoulders, the tree lines, half expecting to see her again, waiting, walking, turning. But she never appeared again. Or maybe she didn't need to. After all, it hadn't been his turn yet.